So let's first talk about demand elasticity. Here's what elasticity really means. It's the sensitivity. It's how sensitive we are to price changes. Here's the thing. Anytime any price in the world goes up, the law of demand says that we're going to demand less of it. But the question is, how much less? Let's say the price goes up by 10%, and as a result you bought 20% less, so you were really sensitive. Well, in that case, what happens is we're going to consider that elastic. The way to actually measure it is this. The formula for elasticity is the percent change in quantity divided by the percent change in price. So in that example I just talked about, if the price changes by 10%, went up by 10%, and you bought 20% less, that'd be 20% over 10. So now notice, since the numerator is bigger than the denominator, 20 over 10, that number is bigger than 1. So really, that's when you're elastic, you're sensitive. So best way to conceptually think about it is this. If you react stronger than the price change, so if the price changes by 10%, but you responded by buying a quantity that changes by anything more than 10%, then the elasticity is going to be bigger than 1 and you're elastic, you're sensitive to it. Usually that happens for luxury goods, so you kind of don't need them, so you can live without them, so you're elastic. Now, on the other hand, if the price went up by 10%, but you bought only 5% less of the good, you don't really change that much, right? So in that case, that number, 5 over 10, that number is going to be less than 1, so then you're inelastic, and that usually happens for goods that are necessities. Notice that we have absolute values here. Some instructors actually have them, some don't have them, so make sure which one yours is using, whether the formula with or without elasticity. Now here's the thing. The reason it really doesn't matter is because without the absolute values, it's always going to be negative because of the law of demand. If the price goes up, it's a positive denominator, well then you're going to want less, and that's a negative numerator. So negative over positive is negative. Or if the price were to go down, then you want more. Then that bottom's negative if the price goes down, and then you're going to buy more. So either way, there's no way that this is going to be positive without the absolute values because the demand slopes down. And so that's why really adding the absolute value really doesn't really matter. But for other elasticities, positive versus negative does matter. So only for the regular demand elasticity is it okay. Let's take a look at an example. What if we know that initially your price is 10 and the quantity is 5, but then when the price goes up to $12, you buy less of the quantity, you're only buying 3. What if the question is, what's the elasticity? Now we know it's percent change in Q over percent change in P, but how do you actually calculate percent change? Well, here's where what most econ instructors use is what's called the midpoint rule. The midpoint rule is basically saying that this could be simplified as Q2 minus Q1 over Q1 plus Q2 over 2 all over P2 minus P1 over P1 plus P2 over 2. So, step 1, panic, right? Not really. Here's the thing. Here's a much simpler way to think about this. It might look long and complicated, but the best way to think about this is that it's the percent change, that the percent change in anything is really the difference over average. That's what the percent change is. So if you think about it, here if we wanted to calculate it, first notice the quantities in the numerator, so let's first work with the quantities. The percent change, notice to calculate the percent change, just zooming into this numerator over here, it's the amount change, Q2 minus Q1. So in here, since we're using absolute value, it doesn't matter, 3 minus 5, 5 minus 3. Either way, it's 2 over, and this is Q1 plus Q2 over 2. That's just the average. That's just the number in between 3 and 5, which is 4. We could do the math and do 3 plus 5, 8 over 2, 4, or you could really just look at the number between them. So that's really all it is, difference over average. Now, that's for quantity on top. Now in the denominator, just do the same thing for price. So same thing, here's how simple it is, difference over average. The difference between 10 and 12 is 2, and the average, the number between 10 and 12 is 11. Oh, there you go. So there you go, the elasticity would just be 2 over 4 divided by 2 over 11. So whatever that is on your calculator will be the elasticity. One other thing we can look at is how elasticity is related to the slope of the demand curve. In general, when you have a horizontal demand curve, that's going to be more elastic. And as you get steeper and steeper, more steeper demand curves have more inelastic demand. In general, though, elasticity and slope aren't the exact same thing, but they're related in that way. You can actually, there's a formula which you can derive using calculus. You don't really need to know this for introductory economics, but there is a formula relating slope and elasticity.